Welcome to another episode of Fight the Burnout. Today we have John Mulet here. He is a ex-New York police department officer. Has a very interesting story, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. And also, he now runs a business called Mission First Partners, and they're doing a lot of good wellness and have been for a long time for our first responders and police departments. So, as I always like to do, John, let you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background in policing and also what you do now.
Thank you, Chris. As you said, my name is John Mulet, and I am the founder of Mission First Partners. And to really tell you the story of where Mission First Partners came from, we got to go back about 20 years. Now, I started my law enforcement career in 1990 as a special agent trainee in what used to be the United States Customs Service, and had a very uneventful law enforcement career. And until, like a lot of people, it took a big turn on September 11th, 2001. That day, I was working at 25 Broadway, right outside the Statue of the Bull on Wall Street. So I was there for the entire attack. We were in the cloud. We were in the aftermath. I spent the next 48 hours down there. And then for the next 2.5 months, I was part of a team that 3 times a day would take the families of the missing and the deceased down into the pit so they could view the recovery effort that was going on and offer them whatever kind of comfort and solace we could, an ear to listen to, a shoulder to cry on while we were down there. Needless to say, it left a mark. Um, I lost friends that day. 20 years later, I'm still losing them. I lost my career and I lost 8 years of my life to PTSD. But maybe the only thing worse than everything that I lost there were the people, my friends, that were left behind and having to see what became of their lives. I watched people go down into that pit every day and come out shells of what they were when they went in. Some of them were like me. They were able to get very high quality mental health treatment and start putting their lives back together. Other people weren't so lucky. They tried to hold their lives together with string and chewing gum and limp across the line to their 20th anniversary when they could retire. And I'm sorry to say, not all of them made it. And they're the reason I do this, and they're the reason this company exists. So, for a number of years, I was had a nice, quiet life. I was happily retired, and then a friend of mine approached me because he was a founder of a startup that was going to be a mental health and substance abuse treatment facility specifically for veterans and first responders. Now, he was former Navy, so he had a lot of people on the military side, but he didn't have anybody on the first responder side. So he asked me to work on his advisory board with him. And it actually was a great experience. I got to help create their first responder program. I wrote all of their training materials. I established their relationships with a whole bunch of law enforcement agencies in New England. And for several years, he had been encouraging me to go out on my own and start my own shop to do training. And then in the summer of 2020, three things all happened at the same time, in the same week, I should say. One was I finished writing a program called Psychological Survival School, which was a 2 year project to create a program that would address PTSD, mental health, and suicide prevention specifically for law enforcement. That same week, the executive director of the New Hampshire Chiefs Association called me and asked if I could help out with his trade show because his psychological presenter had dropped out at the last minute. And I told him that I had just finished this project and he liked it and he wanted it for the trade show. And then that weekend, unfortunately, we had two law enforcement suicides in New Hampshire. One of them was in the town where I live. So that was kind of my sign that it was time to do this. So at 12:01 a.m., September 11th, 2020, Mission First Partners officially became a New Hampshire company. And it was very important for me that the company started on that day because to me, it was a day, it was a way of taking this day that had haunted me for the last 20 years and finally turn it around and try and turn it into something that could help other people.
I got goosebumps through that whole thing because I can feel the yeah, I still remember. I think everybody around the world remembers where they were and what was going on that day. And for you to be just down the road, that must have yeah. And all the people that you lost, the colleagues, the friends, the yeah family that we call them. Yeah. How so many questions I have. And how did you working through, because I know for me in my policing, the thing that took the most toll on me was that emotional side of telling families those notification jobs, those advising jobs, telling the families and having to work through that emotional side and in a way disconnect yourself from it and then trying to reconnect yourself. How did you work through that on during those times during that America had just been attacked, the all of that, all of those emotions, but then also working with the families of the victims and that of all those people that were in the trade towers and around the trade towers.
Well, it's funny you talk. Well, I'll address the World Trade Center stuff specifically in a moment, but it clicked. It's kind of funny that you talk about doing notifications because in my classes, one of the things I ask my classes is when did you realize this job was starting to change you and it was starting to change who you are? And I always get a lot of different reactions to it, but I always say for me, I knew this job was changing me when those death notifications stopped being hard to do, when it
Mm.
became something just very sort of rote and very mechanical. And we had that experience also because in the first couple of days when we were still putting everything together, my team was responsible for a list. Now, what happened was in the immediate aftermath, there were a lot of people in the hospitals who were unidentified. So as we were identifying them, we kept a list that people could come and check and see if their loved ones were on. And it was our responsibility to maintain this list and to talk to these family members. And that was probably one of the harder parts because you would have people come in and they were just sort of looking straight ahead, hoping they were going to finally get this news that whoever they were looking for was found. And then or one of my colleagues were the person that had to tell them, no, I'm sorry, they're not on the list. And, I've said to people, as a cop, you can understand taking away somebody's freedom. You can understand taking somebody's life. But there's nothing like the feeling of taking away somebody's hope. There's nothing that can prepare you for that. And the other thing is we were doing it. Um, People started making, I guess, for lack of a better word, missing persons posters and putting them up where we were keeping the lists as we were identifying people. And I would sit there was on a working day, and I would start to look at all these posters with pictures on them. And the thing that struck me about them was that the kind of pictures they were. They were birthdays, they were holidays, they were vacations, they were graduations. All these pictures were probably taken on the happiest days of these people's lives, and now they were being used to identify them. And that's one of the things that I carry with me after all these years too. Even after 20 years, I'm still haunted by those faces.
Yeah, man. So how how'd you get through it in those days?
I have to tell you, when it was actually going on, it wasn't hard because we were working 12, 16-hour days. We were just going back. We had that sort of mission right in front of us that we had to keep going after. We had to be there for the families. we had to stay on top of, any risks that were coming up. But it wasn't until things died down and we finally had that downtime to sort of process everything that you've been through, that's when it really begins to hit you. My group, I happen to be lucky. The lieutenant that ran the group, she happened to have a PhD in psychology, and she crafted the procedure by which we would take the families down, the support systems that we had in place, and everything like that. And every day before we started for the day, she had us all sit in a circle and just talk about, how we were feeling and
Wow.
everything like that. And that was probably kind of the first exposure that I ever had to that sort of like peer support. But she also wrote, after the fact, she also wrote a couple of articles for academic journals. And I'll never forget one of them. She said, and it's the truth, and it happens to all of us. She said, my cops were vessels that thousands of people had deposited their grief into. And by the time we got to the end, they were very, very full.
Mm.
And you really, like I said, at the end, you have that downtime, you start to process things. And it was really interesting to see some people's reactions to it. Some people fell apart. Some people, a lot of people became very, for lack of a better word, very kind of hedonistic, like it had just been impressed on them in a very dramatic fashion that life was fleeting and they needed to grab all of it they can. In my case, I became very, very angry. I mean, unbelievably angry, to the point that it scared me.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, I can kind of relate with your, not to the, not from the same circumstances, but yeah, I got to the same stage where I was angry as well, which it's scary, isn't it? When you have these outbursts and this anger. I don't know how yours was, but you end up, you're like this.
All you want to do is yell at the walls, and the walls don't want to listen.
It's funny. I was doing some stuff for myself and that, some personal development stuff, and I remember somebody asking me, or saying something around, my policing and what were you like, and I was uncovering things, and I was like, if I was having a bad day, guess what? You got a bad day,
Mhm.
and that is completely not. And like I look back, I'm like, wow, man, that no wonder I was so burned, but. So what did you start, in those immediate days after? Because I know you've done a lot of work on yourself and over the years and that. On those immediate days after, what did you do? Did you do anything to kind of work on yourself with that anger and that, or did it just kind of, was it there for a while?
It was there for a very long time, and even though it's not that long ago, relatively, it was 20 years ago. We didn't talk about these things like self-care and, talking to professionals. Fortunately, they did create a program for us at Mount Sinai Hospital, the World Trade Center First Responder Program, which actually still exists to this day and is still taking care of people. And that's where I met my first psychologist. And that actually, knowing her, actually very much impressed upon me the need not just for professional care for first responders, but for culturally competent professional care for those first responders. Because once I retired and I didn't want to go into the city anymore every day, I had to obviously find a new psychologist. So I went through 4 or 5 of them before I found one that was a good fit. But I always said the first couple that I saw, it was a good thing that they weren't the first people that I saw. Because if I had, I probably would have left. I probably would have left and never went back. And the likelihood is I'd probably be dead by now.
Mm, yeah. I know. Yeah, you said a lot of the guys that you knew from back then, didn't make it till now. How does What do you think was the difference between you actually, continually seeking and working on yourself and that versus, the men and women that weren't able to do that for themselves?
Well, I had access to some very good people at the Mount Sinai program. Um, part of part of what they did to help me begin to get better was I had to understand that where I was with my PTSD, um, it was going to be tough for me to go on. So I had to make a decision, and that decision was if John Mulet ever had a chance, was ever going to have a chance at life, Officer Mulet was going to have to die, and that was a very tough decision to make because a lot of our lives, a lot of our identity is wrapped up in this job. And, I think that was one of the things that made me kind of rudderless for a lot of years was that I didn't have that contact back to the job. That my wife tells me I'm only at my best when I'm around cops. And, and that is the part of this that I get from it that helps me.
Mm.
And, I think that's a very strong thing. And that's one of the reasons we encourage peer support so much because even somebody that isn't doing very well themselves, they can be encouraged, they can find purpose by helping somebody else. And, because we come from that background of helping, we're always looking for that way to help somebody else. Um, you talk about how we didn't talk about things. One of the things I talk about when I lecture on this stuff. The first arrest I ever made, the NYPD, it was called a 511. Aggravated unlicensed operation, somebody driving with a suspended license. Very common rookie collar. This one wasn't so common though, because this one had a dead 8-year-old kid under a car that got hit by somebody passing a school bus. And I said, after I did my reports, after I did my notifications, after I did everything what I was supposed to do, you know what I did? I got back in my car and I went back out on patrol.
Yep.
I never asked myself if I was okay. My bosses never asked if I was okay, and I can't even fault them because you know what? I don't think anybody ever asked them in their careers if they were okay. But I think that was one of the things that needed to change. We needed to start asking each other, "Are you okay?"
It's so true because while you were saying that I was like, okay, what was my first arrest and all that. I don't think I was ever asked, are you okay with what we just went to, or how are you doing after that job, or I mean, I went to a guy who'd been dead for 3 weeks, not even out of police college, like police academy. I was on what they called station duty halfway through. Went to a guy who'd been dead for 3 weeks, and then went back to the station and ate rice. And you know what
Yep.
happens? I mean, any law enforcement or first responder knows what the body's like after 3 weeks.
Oh yeah.
We never talked about it afterwards. Then, straight out of police college, a few weeks afterwards, went to a guy who jumped in front of a train. The first thing that I found was his heart on the ground. We never got asked, "Are you okay with what you just saw?" Straight out of training.
And you know what? And we've always accepted that's what it is. And you know what? The truth is, the job is a catalog of
Yeah.
horrors, and that part of it is never going to change. But what we can change is how we train people to react to it
Yeah.
and how we support it. Now, the guys I learned this job from, their answer to all of this was have another drink.
Yeah.
That was it. For that generation of cops, that was the one socially acceptable way to deal with trauma. Was you went to the bar, you had a drink, you talked about it, or maybe you didn't talk about it. Maybe you just had a few more drinks, and that clearly was not the way to go
Mm.
because that damaged a whole lot of people as well.
So, if you could, I know you're doing this training. So, what is it that what would be the top three things, say, or maybe five things that you tell or teach, the young or not so young police officers and first responders nowadays, so that what happened for you, I like to say, during your career and helped you get to where you are now, so that doesn't, so they don't have to go through that and live that themselves. They can, collapse that time as such and work through it sooner, or not even have to have the need to work through it.
Well, I talk about several things. One of the things we do, whether we realize it or not, is something called compartmentalization,
Hmm.
where we take all these traumas and we file them away into these small compartments. And that is very important because, especially when you have these mass casualty situations, these injured kids, stuff like that, you have to be able to separate that horror of what you're seeing from the clarity you need to do your job. So that is an important skill. The problem is we become too entrenched into it, and then we begin to compartmentalize every part of our lives, and that's where it becomes really bad. And that's one of the things that you need to stay aware of. One of the things that I tell them is one of the secrets, I think, to surviving this job, and it's not really a secret. It's actually very simple. It's when you're home, be 100% at home, and when you're at work, be 100% at work. And it's very easy to say, it's very difficult to do. But I tell them, if you need motivation, here's your motivation. If you are at work and you start letting the stuff at home creep into work, and you start letting it take over what you're thinking, and you keep your eye, and you forget how dangerous this job really is, and you take your eye off the ball, one day the chief is going to be handing your spouse a nice crisply folded flag while a bunch of guys play the bagpipes. And conversely, if you let this job take over everything, if you forget to tell your family that they're the most important things in your life and they always matter first, one day you're going to come home and you're going to put the key in the door and nobody's going to be there. And it really is that simple. And I know when I say that, I know what everybody is in the audience is thinking, especially the chiefs. They're like, "Oh yeah, that's great. Be 100% at home until the phone rings." And I get that. We all have that. But just because we can't do it one day doesn't mean that 100% isn't our goal every day. Some days it may be 90, some days it may be 50, some days it may be 10. It doesn't mean we stop trying. What I always say is progress, not perfection. That's
Give 100% of what you have at that time
mhm.
that you're able to give, and strive for even more. Before you go into the next one, what's your tips and tools to actually implement that? Because I know if I look back on mine, I was great at work. I could be having so-called crap stuff going on at home that actually was me taking stuff from work home, and then me
It
thinking it was
bounces
reflecting the
back.
other way around. Um, but then when what would be your tools? Because I have my ideas on it now after going through it all and working through it. But what are the tools in that you tell people to, to really make sure that you can actually, simple things to implement that and make sure that happens. I know, focus on it, do the best that you can each day. What are some other things that you kind of?
Well, one of the things we do with our program is we teach a set of what we call thinking traps, which are thought processes that pull you into a spiral. So if you're teetering on the verge of PTSD, it will start you down. If you're already into it, it's going to pull you down deeper. Now, it starts off with something very, very innocuous, what I call tunnel vision. Which, what is tunnel vision? It's the inability to see options in life. And when you're a cop, what's the biggest thing that you have the inability to see options in? What if I'm not a cop anymore? What am I going to do? And I understand what a scary prospect that can be because I've been through it myself. But what I try to tell people is, yes, it's a job. It's a very big part of your life. But at the end of the day, If it's the job or your life has to win. Ultimately, it is just a job. There are a lot of other jobs in the world. Just by the law of averages, you're bound to be qualified for one of them. And by the way, most of them pay better.
With less stress.
And then
I
and the other end of it is hopelessness. You know that when you get to hopelessness, you're bouncing off the bottom. You're really at the end. But through that, we show how these thinking traps make they start to fall like dominoes. Okay, one leads right into another one, and by that we start to see this spiral. That starts bringing you down.
Yeah, no, I 100% completely on board with that. I'd run a train that's called "Who Am I If Not."
Yep. Mhm.
Who am I if not? And it doesn't matter what stage of your career you're in. Who am I if not? Or even if you're not even a cop, it's the same exact thing. We have it, but cops have it real bad because we have so much pressure on us, and it's so true. When you can release that, and you can be like, hey, who am I? Who am I actually? Then you can actually be that person at different times and apply it in different ways. So I love that. I absolutely love it. Uh,
And one of the other things I teach is, in my lectures, I always talk about the 5 signs of emotional suffering from the campaign to change direction, because I think they're very important, and it could be save the life of somebody you love one day. But I also try to emphasize with them, when we're talking about cops, a lot of the stuff that we look at to see suicidal ideations, you're not going to see, because what are we taught from the first day of the academy? We're taught to have that mastery over our emotions. So, these cues, these things that come up that would tip you off on other people, generally speaking, you're not going to see them in cops. And I've been to departments where they've had a suicide, and they torture themselves. What did we miss? What didn't we see? And the truth is, you could have been looking, and you wouldn't have seen it.
we're very good at putting masks on because it's what we have to do every day. We have to turn up to a grieving mother who's just lost their kid. We have to turn up to a person who's just been beat up completely, and we have to be the strong person for everybody. And so we're very easy at it. I remember my darkest days where I would do stupid things on motorcycles, and I wouldn't ever think about how do I take my own life, but I would think about it doesn't. I'll push myself, and if something happens, it happens.
That well, it's somehow I think you've seen one of my lectures, because that's another thing that we talk about, and I call it the cop cure. And the cop cure, it may go by different names. I call it the cop cure, but what the cop cure is, I'm having mental problems, I'm having emotional problems. They may be personal, may be professional. Doesn't really matter, because I'm a cop. So I can't go and get help with those things the way everybody else does. So what I do is I take the cop cure. And the cop cure is, I take a job that's a lot harder and a lot more dangerous, and I let the rush help me to forget that mentally I'm coming apart at the seams. And something, it works for a while. It really does. But eventually even that isn't enough.
I used to do it on. I used to. It wasn't so much the job. I do it on my. It was on my motorcycle, because I ride motorcycles, and so I'd search for the thrill. Anybody who listens has heard me say this before. I'd search for that thrill, and the adrenaline rush, and I would push things beyond the limits, and yeah, it works for a while, but in the end, it all it does is destroy more things. And where I was going with it was my best friend, who's a cop that I met at police college in training. I went through stuff twice while I was in my career, and the first time, my wife and I didn't really tell anybody that we were going through stuff, that things were struggle. Again, a cop thing. Don't need to tell people. Yet I wear my heart on my sleeve most of the time, as the true me. The second time I told my best friend, I was like, oh, this is the second time. This is what we're going through. This is what's going on. He's like, whoa, wait a second before we continue. The second time? Didn't even see it the first time. Yet I see him at least once a month. And so it is. We're very good at it. So how do people around us help recognize or help out in those kind of situations? If somebody is, what are some of the signs that they might look for in this cop, maybe as a family member or a friend, that you've found that can help so that they can just support the person, not try and change them, anything like that, because you know you can't push a cop into doing something or anybody really. But what are some of the signs and ways that they can support that
Well,
person?
it's funny you ask that because one of the things I tell people is if you really want to know how somebody is doing, you never ask them. You ask the people that are closest to them
Yeah.
because those are the people that are really going to see the changes. But one of the things, and I make it a point in all my lectures to talk about because of an experience I had, I always talk about um, there is one very strong sign that someone is imminently considering suicide, and this is one of the ones you do see in cops. And it's so dangerous because it's so misinterpreted. And this sign is when somebody who has been very depressed for a very long time suddenly comes out of it. And because we always like to believe the best of about the people that we care about, we always take that as a good sign. So we look at Bob and we'll say, "Oh, that's great. You know what, Bob? He was dealing with a divorce, job, whatever. He was down for so long, finally came out. But good for him. I'm glad." And anybody who has any background in mental health will tell you that is the time you need to be very, very concerned because Bob didn't get past his problems. Bob finally decided to do something about his problem. And like anybody that finds an answer to a question that's been dogging them for a really long time, they feel this great sense of relief. So you see them sort of come out of this depression. And one of the reasons I always make it a point of saying that is just before COVID popped off, I was testifying at the New Hampshire Commission on PTSD and First Responders. And it was a panel from all disciplines, law enforcement, fire, EMS, government. And after my talk, and I spoke about this, two guys came over to me and they had this very shaken sort of look. And they introduced themselves and they asked me, they thanked me for speaking. And they were two firemen. And one of them said, he said, "I have to tell you something." He said, "A friend of ours killed himself last year." He said, "And it happened exactly the way you said it was going to." He said, "In fact, we were looking at a picture that we all took together about 2 weeks before it happened, and we were talking about how much better he looked, and that we were happy for him. And after hearing that, this is one of the things that I always have to get out whenever I speak."
Hmm. Is it because they kind of come back, they find that thing, they're like, oh yeah, and then something happens and drops them down again?
No, it's more that just when they finally made the commitment to take their own lives, they see that as the answer to their problems. So they get a sense of relief that now they've finally found the answer to these things, to this problem that's been dogging them for so long.
Yeah. So is it? So I'm just trying to for the listeners, even
Oh,
somewhat
absolutely.
myself, but for listeners. So is it a they've got this down sense to them and that, or they're you can kind of see this downness to them, and then it's a drastic spike, or is it?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
they
Okay.
suddenly seem to come out of it. They're happy again. They're
Yeah.
engaging again, and everything
So
like that.
there's no gradual to it. It's just one day they're not they seem not all that great, not themselves, and then all of a sudden they're back to that chippy, happy, everything is amazing self. Yeah, okay, I can see that. Yeah, no, it's a scary one, isn't it? I like to ask everybody because I'm a why guy. Again, this comes down into that who am I if not? And I believe that we are our why, not what we do. And I have a process where I take people in a 7-step process that we go deep into this and really figure it out and figure out where it stemmed from in your childhood. Mine, for the longest time, and it doesn't even, I don't think it changes, but you find different layers of it. My deepness of it was to create less pain. And now it's actually now I recognize it goes one level deeper. It's actually so people are seen, to help them see themselves. Because when I was young, I didn't feel like I was seen. And so it's done everything in my life comes from my childhood. What would you say, John? Yours your why is of who you actually are.
My why is partly for the people I work with, and in a way, it reflects back and it helps me with myself. So I'm here today because when I was in a bad way, there were people that cared enough to do something. So now that I'm in a position to do something for other people, I feel not just a responsibility, but an obligation to do it as well. And believe me, there are days where this is really, really hard. There are days where I sit here and I say, I don't want this anymore. This is too hard. The problems are too big. And then I have to go back to that why, which for me was why I started doing it in the first place, which is all those people that got left behind and their lives and what became of them. And in a way, they sort of gave me my own why, because being able to be back with law enforcement again in a different, granted in a different capacity, but helping people, to me, that gave me the rarest of all things in life. It gave me a second chance.
Hmm. I love it. I love it. What was the why to get into law enforcement?
Um, well, that's actually again, that's a little bit of a funny story. I was never supposed to be a cop. When I first started in college, I was supposed to be a doctor. Then I was supposed to be a lawyer. And I got really good LSAT scores, had really good college transcripts. And when I graduated college, it was the early 90s. And not only was the economy terrible, but there was more people in the US at that time. There were more people in law school than there were working lawyers in the United States. So now I'm beginning to think maybe this isn't a good career path. So I'm looking at where I can go with an economics degree. And I looked at the Treasury Department, and because I had an economics degree, I got recruited. I got into doing financial investigations, and that's what started me on the journey.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Oh, that's pretty cool. So, what would be on that then? You've done law enforcement. You're now helping law enforcement to to move through everything and be the best that they can be, and not have not sit where you were for the longest time. What's your number one piece of advice for listeners when it comes to being the best that they can be within themselves and within law enforcement?
Hmm. That's an interesting one. I would say to be the best you can be, no matter what it is, whether you're law enforcement or not, you have to find the thing you love in life, and you have to love it intensely. It can't be a half effort. It has to be all in or nothing.
I love that response. It is. It's full on. Especially us law enforcement, we're quite good at that. Sometimes it's destructive. Okay, so obviously you help out law enforcement with your wellness program and that with the Mission First Partners. How do people, and we'll put all the links down in the description down below. But how do people find you or seek out your services or get to know you more?
Well, they can find us on our website and read about some of the things we do. They can email me. They can call. One of the things that we do every year, which I'm very proud of, we do a remembrance every year called Twilight. And Twilight is a remembrance of law enforcement lives that we lost to suicide. We do it every year on the day of the winter solstice because we pick the shortest day of the year to remember lives that were too short because of suicide. We ask people to record videos. They can be about anything they want. They can be tributes. They can be memorials. They can be words of encouragement. And the videos are timed to end at the moment of sunset, twilight, at which time we ask all of our participating agencies to call 1 minute of radio silence to remember everyone that we lost to suicide. And we started doing that just 3 years ago. And in 3 years, it grew from one radio transmission in one police department to an hour and a half event. So I'm really hoping that more and more people are going to be encouraged to participate in it. So, we can really shine a light on this problem.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, no, especially this year, the numbers are just coming out of the U.S. The numbers are crazy at the moment. So yeah, it is a it's a pandemic in its own, to be
Yep.
perfectly honest. So yeah, no, I appreciate that, and everything you're doing is amazing. Last question I have before we wrap up is, what would you say your top tip to self happiness is?
I would say, well, you know what? It's partly what you were saying before about finding your why. But I don't really think you can find your why. I think your why needs to find you. And you need to be open to the experience of finding that. I mean, yeah, I tell people all the time, believe me, before I got into all of this, I was very happily retired. I had a nice, quiet little life. I had my routine, I had no stress. If you think I wanted God touching me on the shoulder and saying, you need to do this, I'm about the last guy on the planet that wanted that. But, here we are. So
Uh,
that's what I would say. Be open and let your why find you.
Yeah, no, I love that. Obviously, I take people through a process of it, but they have to be open to it, And law enforcement are some of the harder ones to work through, the ones that are current law enforcement, because they are very rigid and stuff. But once they are open and they let themselves be open to it, you're right. It is just it flows and it just lands and it hits like a Louisville Slugger.
Oh, Chris, I can tell you, counseling people, some of the toughest guys, the guys that don't want to say anything, you finally find that little crack and you get through to them, and it's like 30 years of crap just comes flowing out. It's like they can't stop talking.
Yep.
So it's making those connections to people where you can sort of break through that resistance and really get down to what they're thinking and what they're feeling.
Yeah, it is. It's so true. Well, John, thank you very much for being here. Do you have any last words that you'd like to finish off with?
Thank you for having me, Chris. I would just say to everybody out here, on the job or off, stay alert, stay healthy, and most of all, stay safe, because we need good people out there.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I'm going to add on to that. Also, be open for assistance. We call for backup when we need it. So let people be your backup. Let us that are doing what you and I are doing, John. Be that backup. Again, John, thanks for everything that you're doing. What the stuff that you're doing is just amazing, and I'm so glad to see that it's going well, and hopefully it continues to grow and impact in that, because it is well needed, and the more we can help, the more we can then help the citizens of places as well. Again,
Good to
this
be
is
with you, Chris.
yeah, it's been amazing, John. Again, this is Fight the Burnout. As I always say, take one thing away from this that hit you, and that you're like, oh yeah, that, and then just start to implement it and run with it or work on it. If we take too much stuff, then we get overwhelmed and we just end up taking no action at all. So just take action on one thing, just like you would in a situation or a scene or a job. You you start taking action. So take that action. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you like and subscribe. We have every week a new episode comes out with a law enforcement or first responder at the moment. And also, if you can share this, there is somebody out there that's going to get a message from this, like you have, or maybe you didn't get a message, but you know somebody that could use it. Send it out, share it out to them, because the more people that we can hit and touch and impact, the better the world will be. Again, if you want to reach out to me, my email is team@createfromwhy.com, and I will email you back directly personally. But till next time, thank you. Keep being safe out there. Keep protecting us, and we will talk to you again soon.